Hello everyone, this video will cover over the group strategic planning project and give you a little bit more detail into what's expected out of that project. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you'll navigate to the Content tab, we'll scroll down to Assignments and scroll down to Strategic Planning Project. Now before we move on, I do want to note that if you have not yet went to the Group Worksheets module and viewed the Group Worksheets video, to please do that before going to the Group Strategic Planning Project and looking through the documentation. So go ahead and pause the video here, view the group worksheets, and then come back for the overview of the strategic planning project. Now, if you have already viewed the group worksheets project, you'll start to understand or get a better idea of how the worksheets are going to factor into the project overall and how everything ties together. So we won't focus on that within this video introduction. We will stick strictly to the group strategic planning project. So what we'll start out with is the project outline. If you'll navigate and click on that, what you'll see is a document that comes up that will give you just a very detailed overview of the expectations for the project and give you a little bit more insight into what you'll be getting out of the project overall. Now, as a group, you will be assigned into groups, and we'll go over that in just a second, how that will work. But as a group, you will be completing a semi or a quasi-strategic plan for an organization. Now, this can be an organization that's local to you or local here within the Tri-Cities, or that can be an organization that's virtual. Now, if it is a virtual organization because you are having difficulty finding a local organization to work with, please contact me first before you start working on the project so that we can discuss. I would much rather you prefer you to work with a local organization, but again, if you're having some difficulty, just email me, contact me, and we'll talk about working with a virtual organization. Now, we will be conducting peer evaluations, which again, I'll go over that when we discuss how teams are going to be put together for the project, but just wanted to point that out here. Now, when you start thinking about the project as a whole and what you're going to be getting out of it, these are several concepts that we're going to be discussing throughout the semester. So if you're just now coming to the class and just now viewing this video before we've gotten started within the lecture material, don't get too hung up in the details because we will be discussing each of these concepts throughout the semester. I just want to include this in the introduction video so that you can start to see how all this ties together. If you think about your strategic plan, it should mirror an upside down triangle. And what I mean by that, I have listed here. So we should start very, very broad with our organizational mission, vision, and values. So we're speaking in very broad terms here. Then we move on to our detailed SWOT analysis. So we're starting to get a little more narrow as we work down the triangle, a little bit more narrow as we talk about specific goals, a little bit more narrow as we talk about specific objectives within those goals, and then even narrower as we talk about action plans within those objectives. So we're going from very broad at the mission, vision, values level to very pointed and specific down at the action plan level. Now, as we move on, the way I've set this instructional piece up is to look at the paper, and I've written out some narrative instructions for that. We'll make this just a little bit bigger here. But I've also included a visual because I know some people learn visually and some people learn narratively. So I've given you both here and given you some instructions as to what's expected for the submission. Now, for the paper submission, there are two parts. There's a paper and there's a presentation component. The paper is going to be a written narrative that's going to flow from each one of your group worksheets. So this is why it's essential that you watch the group worksheet module first before continuing on viewing this module so that you get a better understanding of how your group worksheets are going to help to inform and help you write your strategic plan throughout the semester. Now, I will be grading, on the premise that your group did make a good faith effort in planning and that you'll have made extensive revision to this project throughout the semester so that you're not turning in just your first draft that you put together, but that your plan essentially does go through several drafts throughout the semester, and that's where the worksheets come and tie in overall. Now what's listed here starting with this number 1 is just a bulleted list or a numbered list of the flow of the presentation overall and what I would expect. So of course the first one, you'll have your title page, which is going to include your organization and group member names. You'll move on to your organizational background after that. And in your organizational background, what I'm looking for in 400 to 500 words is essentially, what does the audience that's going to be reading your plan need to know about the organization? So I've put some potential topics here that you can include in your plan, some different aspects that you can look at. But each plan should end with a bulleted pointed list of your mission, vision, and values for the organization. Now, if you pick an organization that happens to not have one or all of these components, this is where your group gets to be really creative and taking what we've learned in class about good mission, vision, and value statements. Your group gets to create a mission, vision, and or value statement for the organization that you'll be working with. But every submission that is turned in needs to have a mission, vision, and value statement. Now, as we move on to the SWOT analysis section, this is going to be 300 words at minimum for each explanatory and concluding section. And what I mean by that is there's 4 elements to a SWOT analysis: your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you'll see this in the visual that I have included here in just one second. But each one of these strengths should be 300 words long at minimum, weaknesses should be 300 words long at minimum, and so on, so on. Now, teams are going to be concluding their submissions with a section that talks about the leveraging opportunities. So how are you taking your leveraging opportunities and leveraging your strengths that exist internally within your organization against the opportunities that exist out in the environment, and how are you working to neutralize any threats that you've identified for your organization. The 4th section of your plan is going to be your goals, objectives, and action plans. So here in this section, you'll have 3 goals that you identify for your organization. Each goal is going to have 2 associated objectives, and each objective is going to have 1 action plan. Again, we'll go over this more within this visual part that we're about to get into. Now this section should conclude with the groups detailing how everything relates back into your SWOT analysis and your mission, vision, and value statement. And then as we move into section 5, this is going to be your reference page. So at minimum, you are required to have 3 peer-reviewed sources. They need to be cited in text as well as APA formatted on the reference page. And I would anticipate most of your peer-reviewed sources are going to show up here in your environmental analysis as your supporting evidence of why you picked this certain thing for the organization as a strength, a weakness, an opportunity, or a threat. Now, as we move down into the structure portion, and this is where I said I set it up visually so you could kind of see what I was talking about. But the information presented here is the same as the information that we just went over here under this paper or content section. So let's go back down to the structure. The first page should be your organization, team member names, and date. Now the second page was going to be your organizational background profile. Again, relevant information summarized in 400 to 500 words, ending with the mission, vision, and values for your organization. Now, depending on how long that is, this may or may not be page 3, but this is going to be section 3 of your overall strategic plan, and that's going to be your SWOT or environmental analysis. So you'll start here with your 4-box grid listing your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you've identified as a group. Here's where I was talking each criteria is going to have 300 words. So your strength, you're going to detail the organizational strengths, and this is where you can support that with peer-reviewed sources. This is going to be done in 300 words minimum. You can see weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are the same with 300 words minimum. And then leveraging opportunities, where your team is going to identify how to leverage the internal strengths with the external opportunities in 250 to 300 words, and then threat neutralization in 250 to 300 words as well, just talking about how you're going to neutralize the identified threats. Section 4 is your goals, objectives, and action plans. So you can see here where I mentioned earlier, you're going to have 3 goals. Each goal is going to have 2 objectives, and each objective is going to have 1 action plan, all conforming to the SMART criteria. Now again, if you're just now viewing this and it's the beginning of class, this may not make sense to you right now, but we will be covering these terms throughout the semester, so we will get into what is SMART criteria, how do we conform to SMART criteria, how do we make good goals, objectives, and action plans. Now this section is going to conclude with a relation to the SWOT and the mission statement in 300 words minimum. So you're going to be talking about how objectives relate back to the goal they're associated with, and how those goals relate back into the SWOT and the mission statement, as well as the action plans, how they relate back to the associated objectives. And then you'll end your submission, your narrative, with your reference page. So again, at least 3 peer-reviewed sources. Now, peer-reviewed are journals, government websites. This does not include something like a blog, Wikipedia, news articles. These are not peer-reviewed sources, so please do not submit them as peer-reviewed sources. You're going to look for journal articles like the American Medical Association, your Healthcare Management Association. You can use the CMS.gov site. You can use countyhealthrankings.gov. These are all peer-reviewed sources that you can include in your submission. Now, technical specifications in terms of the paper, formatting. What I'm looking for is formatted to APA and professionally written, double-spaced, Times New Roman, criteria that you hopefully are familiar with by now, as well as meeting in-top form criteria. Now, I will not go into in-top form criteria in this overview module, but there is a video recording out there that does go over what in-top form is. It's very short, and I would encourage you to go through and review it because your paper and your presentation will need to conform to in-top form criteria. And additionally, you're going to be seeing in-top form throughout the semester, whether that be on your quizzes or whether that be in activities that we will be completing for the course. Now, presentation, your team will be required to put together some type of presentation that gives an overview of your plan. So I'm not looking for really in-depth, but I'm looking for your presentation in 10 minutes at minimum to kind of give me an overview of your plan, talking about each one of those sections. And I'll pull up the rubric and we'll go over the expectations for the presentation in just a moment. Now, while I am watching your presentations and listening to them, these are some key questions that I'm going to be asking myself. So, I do expect each team member to participate and to deliver a part of the presentation. So I'm going to be looking at, how well prepared were you? How well does your presentation address the topic? Were the information that you presented credible and accurate? So make sure this is something that you do rehearse, put together. Take your time. You have all semester to put this together. So I would recommend building this a piece at a time so that you have time to review it and make any edits that you need. The majority of the presentation, I do want to note, is going to need to focus on your team SWOT analysis and the goals, objectives, and action plans that you determine for your organization. Now, additionally, and like I said earlier, we will be discussing this in just a moment, but we will be completing peer evaluations, and I'll go over how we're going to do that for purposes of this class. And there is a checklist here at the bottom if you want to check to make sure you have each one of your materials that are required turned in. So you should have your paper, Your team project submission form, which I'm going to bring up next and show that to you. You can submit both of those to the paper Dropbox, your presentation, as well as completing your peer evaluation. So we'll navigate back to the Group Strategic Planning Project module. We'll navigate down to the next form that's due, which is your team project submission form. Again, you can submit this with your narrative into the Dropbox. But what I'm looking for here, I really just want to get a better insight into how the project went for you. So I'm looking for, what were the most difficult things about the assignment? Did you have a difficult time meeting with each other? Did you have a difficult time finding information? Was your organization unwilling to work with you? I'm also looking for what is something you learned from this project, whether it's in relation to strategic planning or not. Did you learn how to work in a different group dynamic? Did you build a new skill? Did you learn something new on Excel or Word? Or, what is some new thing that you took away from this project? And then overall, how much time did your team really take to complete the project overall? And again, see, I told you we would be referencing in top form all throughout the semester and through the project, and here it is again. So your team will have to notate to me whether you completed and reviewed for each section of in top form. And then down here, just letting me know and verifying that you went through and done minor grammatical things like checked your spelling, check the punctuation, check the grammar, have your 3 sources, and then your team signatures at the bottom, and I will accept electronic signatures for those. Now let's go back to the strategic planning project. We'll navigate down to the rubric. Now this rubric is going to be for the narrative plan that's being turned in. And I'm making this available so that you can look over it. You can go through and do a quick check to make sure you've met all the criteria within the target area. And here's a listing of what's acceptable and then unacceptable. So if your group goes through and makes sure that you meet the target criteria, there should be no reason that your group doesn't perform very well on the project overall. So making sure and confirming that you have the name and location, a history of the organization, the summary of its service lines, critical that you include the mission, vision, and values, and that's under the organizational background. You can see it goes through each section. So here's what you would need to include. Make sure it was in your SWOT analysis, goals and objectives if you want to meet that target. Section, make sure that all of these criteria are listed in there, and then scroll down your referencing page and APA formatting. Again, if you want to meet target criteria, make sure that you've met everything in this box and you're able to go through and check each one of these criteria off. So that one was for the plan overall. The next rubric that I will be showing you is your grading rubric for the presentation. Same thought here. If you want to meet target, make sure that you're going through and you're including, let's say for example in the organizational background, that you're including at least 6 of these bulleted items with the critical mission, vision, and value statement included. Again, for goals and objectives, make sure that you're meeting the criteria under this column right here to receive target, as well as SWOT analysis, and then your presentation. Minor details, meeting the time limit, that your speaking style and the flow and the transfer of information went very smoothly, and that you made some introductory remarks, things like that. So when you review over the rubric, if you're wanting to ensure that you perform very well, make sure you go down and meet all of your target points. Now, one thing before we get into the team evaluation and peer evaluations, I am going to go over the Dropbox here. So let's navigate over to Dropbox. Each group will have a Dropbox set up for their strategic plan. So here, if I was in group 6, strategic planning project paper, this is where you can include your narrative paper as well as your team project submission form in this Dropbox, and then strategic planning project, your presentation piece will go in this Dropbox. If the presentation is too large file-wise to fit into the Dropbox, you have a couple of different avenues available to you, and I'll include that in the instructions for the Dropbox, but you can convert that over to a YouTube video and send me the link for the YouTube video to watch. You can break the presentation up into several different files and send that to me. So there's a couple of different ways you can submit it, but I will not be able to accept anything by email. It must be in the Dropbox because I do have to have a rubric attached to it for grading purposes. Now I'm going to pause the video here, and we'll pick back up with peer evaluations, and I'll make that a separate video so that we don't get lost in the details. But as it stands, this is your overview for your strategic planning project. Before we end, let's go over to content and make sure that we look at, make sure that you're looking at the syllabus to stay up to date with the guidelines and the deadlines, and that you're having everything submitted at the due date. And if there's any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me.